We're facing one of the most challenging times in this century. There is a global pandemic, according to the WHO. A global challenge needs a global response. So today we've been fortunate to meet one of the freedom and peace activists in the world called Henna Maria. She's actually from Finland originally. So welcome. It's really a pleasure to meet. And thank you for coming. You have this, a lot of people have been watching you on YouTube, and you've created a global peace movement called Dawn of Peace. Could you explain us a little bit about your background? How did you get to this point in life?
Sure. Yeah, so I would say that I've always been a seeker, looking for my purpose. I've always been very driven to do something that's meaningful for me in my life. And from a young age, I could really resonate with the life of an activist. So I started out as a human rights activist with Amnesty some 12 years ago. And then from there, I moved on to animal rights, because I could see that the same suffering that I was defending or wanting to protect people from, the animals were also experiencing. So I couldn't separate between the two. I felt, okay, both are sacred, humans and animals, so I need to learn about animal rights as well. And so then I did that. Then from there, I felt called to learn about healing. So first it was kind of focused on social justice, my work, but then I felt more driven to like the spiritual aspect of life and what is causing all these, crimes in the world, all this injustice. And I could see it comes from a place of trauma. So then I was driven to learn healing arts. And so I went to Peru and studied with the indigenous healers there about the way they see the human being, how they see the human family, and how we can heal ourselves, heal our traumas. And then after that training, all of these came together in a calling to create a peace organization that has a spiritual foundation to it. So that's how Dawn of Peace came to be, and that's how I came to do this work. But I'm originally from Finland and grew up in the forest in a very peaceful, free way. And now I feel like everything that I've gone through in my life has been kind of a training for this time. Yeah.
So how do you see the current state of the world? You've been through a lot in your work, and somehow we met you by coincidence in the street at a demonstration that you had in the Malaga area. And suddenly you were there with some other Finnish people, I think, with signs. One of them said, "It's not a crime to breathe." So how do you see the current state of the world?
Yeah, there's many ways to look at what's going on, but through my lens, which is based on rights and wanting to protect the sacredness and integrity of all beings, it's very clear to me that there are profound violations of human rights happening right now. Whether there is a virus or not, that's another debate, which many doctors are getting involved with. From my perspective, what we have to understand is that all medical treatment and all medical interventions have to be voluntary. And this is in the Charter of Human Rights, it's in the UNESCO Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights, it's in the Nuremberg Code, which was established after the Nazi trials, where the doctors were tried for crimes against humanity after the Second World War. So it's a fundamental right, bodily sovereignty and medical freedom. But already before this COVID pandemic came to be, there was already very concerning movements happening in the world that I've been following closely as an activist, where they began to take away, for example, religious exemption from people, or exemption of consciousness, where based on philosophy, for example, you could decline a certain medical intervention like vaccines, for example. So that was already starting to happen leading up to 2020. And in America, they had some huge resistance to that in California and in New York, where they were opposing these new bills. So I was aware of that. So when I founded Dawn of Peace 2019, medical freedom was already as one of our biggest causes, that we have to protect our right to choose what medical treatments we want or don't want. And because I've learned the indigenous healing way, which is all about cleansing, they see that everything that is wrong in the body comes from an inner imbalance, toxicity, or trauma. So the way I'd come to see how a human is healed is not through an injection, or it's not through pharmaceuticals. That was my experience from having learned the healing arts and then began to practice that. So then when this pandemic came to be, and in the very beginning of the pandemic in 2020, they said that there is no way a human being can prevent getting ill from this novel killer virus, and that there's no way you can treat it naturally. And the only way you can respond to it is to do what the state says. That was just for me like red alarm bells going off like everywhere. That this is not right. Because as a human being, you have the right to choose your medical treatment. So that's how I see this. I see it as a systematic, institutional, juggernaut of medical tyranny, just forcing state-driven medical interventions on people. And mask is a medical intervention. The PCR test is a medical intervention. And all these, according to human rights, have to be voluntary based on prior, free, informed consent. But it's not what's happening. They're being enforced by law on individuals who may suffer from these things. Like there's no tests, for example, what masking does to a pregnant lady or an elderly person with a degenerative brain condition, or what it does to the development of children's brains. So there is no informed consent because there's no studies. We've never studied what does it do to the population of the earth when everyone is put on masks. So whether there's a pandemic or not, we have to be really clear on what are our rights. So that's where I have my big issue with this. What's going on is that there's such systemic violation of our fundamental human rights.
And how do you think Spain has handled this? You've been in Spain most of the time, as I understand. Now this is going on all over the world, but you have mainly experiences from here, or
here and Peru. Actually, we got locked in Peru last year. We got stuck there when the situation began overnight. But actually, the experience in Peru and in Spain are very similar. Very, very strict police and military enforced lockdowns. And I see it's very fear-driven. Like my first response when this started was that why do you need armed men on the street if this is about health? I even asked in Peru, there were military guys with machine guns in the small little village where we were. I said, well, are you going to shoot the virus? Why are you here? Health is not a battleground. So I don't understand why within 1 year it's become like weaponized. Like we're fighting the war against the virus. What about our immune systems? Like for the first time ever, it's completely taken out of the context that there's no more talk about the immune system or the healing benefits of all the medicines that we have available that are very cheap, like vitamin D or zinc, or I could go on and on about this, but if people do research, they will find that there's been very successful treatments, ozone therapy, Artemisia annua, for people who have these symptoms. So the fact that it's been immediately politicized and police and military has been mixed into this, I don't see a health crisis. I see a war. That's
very serious and invisible psychological war.
Well, that's it. It's almost like it's the most brilliant war ever waged, because anyone could be the enemy. You know, we're being led to believe that people who have no visible symptoms, who feel fully healthy within their own bodies, could be a carrier of a deadly virus. But as we know, we are made of microorganisms. So to me, it just doesn't make any sense that we should try to stop the spread of viruses when there's more viruses in our bodies than there are human cells or bacteria. There's more viruses in the world than there is stars in the universe. I mean, it's unfathomable amount of microorganisms that we are made of and the nature is made of. So when they're saying that we have a war against these tiny organisms, it seems to me like a madness, like a kind of very brute mentality that we have to like fight against it with machine guns and lockdowns. And lockdown is an imprisonment, you know. If I was the health minister of Finland, let's say, I would say, let's all make sure that we don't get into paranoia or hysteria, because that takes your immune system down. So that's the worst possible thing you could do. Or don't stay indoors, because there's lower quality of air. You know, you're more prone to get sick when you don't get exercise. Go outside and move yourself. But when the official government regulations are absolutely the opposite, it just makes you wonder, is it really about health? And if it is about health, then I'd like to see proof that the government has been protecting us from these toxic assaults that are happening, you know, before. What's happening to our waters? What's happening to our air? What about the genetically modified foods that are causing cancer in the humans? How come that's allowed by the governments? How come they're not really, you know, searching further into the damage and the injuries caused by vaccines, which only 1% get reported in America, and there's already $4 billion paid in injuries to families whose children and family members have gotten injured by vaccines. You know, this is all legal. What about heart disease, obesity? I mean, there's just so much chronic illness in the modern world. And now we're being told that the government cares about our health. It really is obvious to me that it's not true. You know, they profit from sickness. So not from day one, I didn't resonate with the public narrative that this is for your own good, you know.
So if we say that there is a modern medicine paradigm or health paradigm, and there is a more, let's say, holistic or more natural, indigenous health paradigm that you've been talking about, is there any of the modern medicine that you believe in?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I myself have been saved by the modern medicine. When I was in an accident, I fell from a scooter, punctured my lung with a broken rib. And I absolutely champion their emergency abilities to respond to this kind of things, you know. So when it's a life and death situation, I think they're phenomenal. Surgery, you know, critical care. But when it comes to prevention and treatment of illnesses, that's where they go wrong. Because they are only interested in numbing your signals of communication from your body that are telling you that something's wrong. They don't ever get to the root of it. So if you have a headache, they say, take ibuprofen. So you stop the signal which is telling you there's something wrong, I'm having a headache. In my paradigm, from the indigenous, holistic, natural medicine, they would say, you're probably dehydrated. Drink 1.5 liters of water with a bit of salt and lemon. It's not about silencing the pain in the natural paradigm. It's about returning your body into alignment, into balance, by cleansing and by nourishing yourself. So it's all about listening to the symptoms, not annihilating them with a chemical. And then, of course, we see always on the packages of these pharmaceutical substances, it has a list of side effects, you know? And you got to wonder, how come they have such severe side effects? even up to death in many of them, or heart attack. What are they doing to the human body when you take that? You don't get that by taking a cup of ginger lemon tea, It's just so obvious to me that they are trying to, by they, I mean the establishment, the powers that shouldn't be, World Health Organization, United Nations, this kind of so-called central governance bodies that are in place in the world. They're trying to steer people away from self-sovereignty on all areas of life. And ability to heal yourself is probably the most valuable tool you can have. So if they're telling you it's illegal to share tips on how to get rid of COVID symptoms, or they censor doctors who do that, then it's pretty clear, that they're not out to help you discover how to heal yourself, but they're out to make you dependent on this system that they've put into place to only listen to their advice. And it just doesn't make sense, because the two could complement each other very well. The Western paradigm and then the ancient original medicine. It's not alternative. It's been around for thousands of years. The Western is like 100 plus years old. Whereas these indigenous people, they've been carrying this knowledge for thousands of years, and they know how to heal. So we should embrace that knowledge.
We actually had a doctor recently that talked about the Swiss health paradigm. They both have the modern medicine, Chinese medicine, traditional herb, Swiss herb medicine, and other types, and then you can choose yourself. So she was talking about this and not excluding one or the other paradigm, that they could actually support each other.
Absolutely, yeah.
But so obviously there has been a lot of different theories about all these governments around the world. How could they do this all at once, more or less? How could they start up the lockdowns and the restrictions almost at once? And there are many theories about it. What do you think is up and down in that? Because I think for many people to navigate in the information today, you can say mainstream media, some people would say they're wrong, but does that then mean that everything else is right? I mean, how to navigate and how to also prioritize that you take care of yourself and at the same time you communicate with the world. It's a lot of things to do at once.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we just have to exercise our discernment better than ever before. In terms of the central governance question, interestingly, I just came from a call today with the World Freedom Alliance. I'm now officially also collaborating with them, and they are an organization with incredible experts on board, doctors, virologists, immunologists, lawyers, police. I mean, anyone you can imagine, any occupation you can imagine, they have a collaboration going on within this alliance. And there was a member of the Italian parliament who said today in the call that as soon as this pandemic began, it was very clear to them that the Parliament of Italy had no say in it whatsoever. They had all the orders coming through from above. And there was no democracy, no word, nothing anyone could do. It was just an order coming from somewhere else that had to be implemented. And this is her own words. And then when you follow that it's happening everywhere at the same time with the same script, it seems like too much of a coincidence, that there wouldn't be more variance in how people respond to this. But there are a few interesting examples, like, for example, Tanzania. The president of Tanzania, he refused the tests because they actually tested them. They take the PCR test and took samples from a goat, from a papaya fruit, and where was it, from some kind of drink, and they all came out positive. And after that, he said, we don't believe in your tests, and he sent the test back to World Health Organization. And he's banned masking in their country. They said, we don't want to perpetuate hysteria. We just need to look after our health like always before. Overall mortality globally or nationally even in most countries hasn't gotten up. So it's just a bad flu season. That's what he's saying. So, but yeah, to go into your question on mainstream media reporting and alternative reporting, I think most freelance journalists know that there's this way to discover truth, which is follow the money. So you always have to find who's funding what. When there's scientific studies being released, who's funding them? You know, when the pandemic was declared and the projections were published in the beginning of last year by this Professor Neil Ferguson in London from Imperial College, he's funded by Bill Gates. BBC gets like 50 million euros a year from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. If you just look at just Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and see where their money is going, it's quite sobering to see how much power one single organization is having in the world. So when you follow all these leads, you don't need theories, you just get facts, one after another. Oh, they created the Event 201 in October 2019, like 2 months before this began in China, a so-called pandemic war games, where they were practicing a global response to a potential coronavirus respiratory pandemic. And, you know, one big part of that rehearsal was the media's role in propagating the message everywhere. And so I think everyone, when you just, all it takes is just an open mind to ask questions. And when you ask the right questions, you will find verifiable facts, and you'll be able to validate whether somebody's claim is true or not. So I don't think any one of us should go by belief or any kind of theories. We have to remain very adamant about our responsibility to find facts. When you find funding, you find all these, you know, multinational companies and their connections to the governments, the lobbies. You don't need to have any kind of theories. It becomes clear that there is something going on that has been in the making for a while. And how to navigate that, how to look after yourself while finding out and discovering all of these things. The way I do it is I take it from my practice with the indigenous healing arts, is the knowledge of you cannot ever heal anything until you've come to see what is the issue. You have to diagnose the illness properly. So you have to have the knowledge of the root cause of the problem. And so this whole COVID thing is like an opportunity for us to discover everything that's been corrupt in our world already for a very long time. It's just now it's all been highlighted through these different hierarchies and structures of power that have been put into place, which are basically taken away the sovereign status of individual nations, and is under the guise of this pandemic creating like a global governance structure.
In our research, we bumped into a paper called the Lockdown Steps, made in 2010, Locksteps by Rockefeller Institute, I think it was.
Yeah.
And in there, they describe some of the steps that we've seen recently. How do you think, let's say, people who are not into this, maybe, or don't do as much research as you, how do you think they are supposed to contribute, or what would you recommend to them?
It's a really good question, because not everyone has the time and the resources energetically available to go into this search. I mean, I've been reading about this pretty much full time since everything started in March, when it was clear to me from the get-go that this is not what they're saying it is. So I've spent countless hours, watching interviews, going through articles, and just following the money, as we do. But for those who don't have that, I would just say, look at how it's affecting your own personal life. How is it affecting your family? How is it affecting your sense of purpose, your sense of joy in your life. Just tune into heart wisdom. Because actually all those factual pieces that I was sharing, I think they're secondary to what this life should be all about, which is joy. Life isn't worth living for, in my opinion, without joy. And so just by tuning into your own experience of life, you should be able to tell that this isn't the way we want to live from now on. But they are calling it new normality, So that means this is a permanent shift. Otherwise, they would just say this is just a temporary pandemic response. No, they're making it permanent. Just today in our call with the World Freedom Alliance, there was a lady who said in Denmark, they're now changing the wooden signs for the COVID testing centers into steel ones. So they're beginning to make a permanent structure for this kind of medical dictatorship. That's the only way I can describe that, where illness has become demonized, breathing has become criminalized, weaponized. And they're talking about already openly in the media, the masks of the future. Masks are here to stay. What kind of mask would you like in the future? Don't let that infiltrate your consciousness and forget what life was like before. Because let's not forget, we've always had pneumonia. Pneumonia is one of the most common reasons for people in elderly homes and in terminal illness to die. Pneumonia. Yeah, they may have cancer, they may have Alzheimer's, but oftentimes the end way that they go is with pneumonia. It's just somehow the way that we've designed, as lungs and air being the vital part of our life. So when we're close to dying, it manifests oftentimes through pneumonia. But now it's like the pneumonia has been made into this enemy, where we no longer understand that it's part of the natural way to die for many, many old and frail individuals. It's been branded this horror story, which will never end. I mean, if we accept that this is the way we respond to a flu season from now on, then there's no more humanity left. Then we've turned into hypochondriac, paranoid individuals who are just cursed to live in fear for the rest of their lives, where intimacy is a sin. I don't want that kind of life. I will not accept that kind of life.
What do you see as the worst part of this global paradigm that has unfolded the last year, and people's reaction to it?
Yeah, the worst part for me, what makes me sad the most, is how afraid people are to die and how quickly they're willing to sacrifice their lives to avoid death, which seems like a paradox. But so many people seem to just be willing to give up their lives. And what I mean by this is the weddings, the funerals, their trips, their livelihoods, all their hobbies, their friends, their relationship, in order to not to get sick, which could potentially lead to death. But death is a part of life, and there's always risks. There's always been risks. And this is what, for me, is the astounding thing, that if 2017, 2.56 million people in the world died from pneumonia, that wasn't a pandemic. It wasn't blamed on freely breathing human beings. Everyone was just going on in their lives normally, although many people were dying at that time of pneumonia. So for me, it's kind of heartbreaking to see that we're in a similar situation as then, but this time people have just given up their rights and their joy and their relationships in order to avoid this potential sickness. So I just see profound fear of death in people, to the point of them being paralyzed by it.
But it's quite amazing in a way that can happen, because looking at the statistics, any sane person can see that it's not worse than a normal flu season.
Yeah.
So what is it that creates this fear in people? Is it a lack of education, a lack of common sense? How can that happen?
Yeah, so I would, from my perspective, I would call it as a rise of a new religion, Scientism. So in the modern man, it seems to me that they would rather believe in this data, like you were mentioning before, and science, which isn't true science, because true science is asking questions. But this is scientism, so it means it's science that has been declared by a certain authority, and everyone is just to gobble it up. No one's allowed to question the science. And why we've gotten to that point is, first, the spirit was distilled out of our culture. You know, I'm talking about the modern culture. Having spent time with the indigenous people closely for almost 5 years in the Amazon rainforest, I came to see that they don't have fear in their culture. The indigenous people, they don't have fear. They know themselves. They know how to heal themselves. And they know that death is just a transition from one body to an ethereal being. It's from you transition from time to eternity. They see it's not death, it's not the end of anything. It's just another phase in your journey as a soul. And it's not some kind of concept for them. They know it because they are so sensitive. Their senses are so wide open, unlike ours, because we get dulled and numbed by all this artificial, environment that we live in, all the bombarding of information, all the, fear and violence and everything that we consume in our consciousness by being a modern person. They don't have any of that. They live in nature. So they have intuition. They have clairvoyance, clairsentience, where they feel the presence of the spiritual reality around us. So they know that we are eternal beings. So they're not afraid of death. But this has been taken out of the life of a modern human being. We don't have very much knowledge about the spiritual reality of life. And so that void, which I see and the indigenous people see as a very integral part of being a human being, has to be filled with something. And now what I'm seeing is being filled with this scientism. And the messiah of this scientist religion is the vaccine. And you are a heretic if you decline it. It's kind of like a cult that has formed. And this is, for me, the reason why so many people are just blindly following on with these claims that are not based in reality, is that they've put the science into a place of a god, really. And it comes from lack of knowledge of who you truly are and the knowledge of God.
And it's paid science, not independent science.
Absolutely.
So if the fact that you say that human beings lost their spirit over a period of decades, if that's the worst thing that we have, let's say, come to realize during the last year, what is the best thing that happened, do you think?
Best thing, I think, is the fact that people are beginning to be really thirsty for the knowledge of health. How is health generated, really? I think it is the biggest discussion now, is there another way? Have we just gone down a completely the wrong way, this pharmaceutical way, which is just generating more and more chronic illness? Because the chronic illness has just been rising exponentially in the last decades. So clearly that's not the way. So health is on the table, and we are scrutinizing the way that we've been living, up until this point. So a gift that can come out of this is a lot of knowledge on natural medicine, just what oxygen does to our bodies, because we're talking about the danger of masks. So then that is helping to get the message across how vital it is for us to get good air and be outside, the importance of clean water. All these things are coming up a lot into the dialogue. Another thing is our rights. We've been living in such a kind of cotton-balled, pink, unicorn illusion as Westerners that there is no war, there is no injustice, everything is good, we are free, up until 2020 happened, that we didn't need to know about our rights. We didn't need to know even the constitutions of our own country. But, you know, we were completely blind to the fact that there have been nations that have been oppressed and genocided all the while. All the while. Even the genocide of the indigenous people is real. It's still happening in the jungle. What's happening in the Middle East? You know, what's happening in certain African countries. So it's like we had been kind of lulled into this illusion of a perfect world. But now this crisis is like shaking up all the dirt that has been under, so that we all see that we have to like rebuild our society profoundly. And we have to examine our values. We have to come to understand about true health, you know, our rights, where do they come from? So we can heal this world, because it hasn't been, even before COVID, you know, it hasn't been good. There's been so many systematic violations of different, you know, ethnicities and cultures, that this is just providing the opportunity for us to look ourselves into the mirror as a humankind and see all the ways that we've gone wrong. Yeah, I would say it's increasing dialogue and awareness a lot.
And what are you doing to make the world a better place?
Yeah, if I had more time in my day, I would tell you.
Besides coming here.
Everything, like, there's so many projects I'm involved with. Well, first of all, what I felt was very important was to have local presence. So to have contact to the actual community where you live. And so not just do the activism online, but to be on the streets. So since the summer solstice, so June last year, we've been every Sunday in the Paseo Maritimo there on the coast in Fuengirola. And we have been sharing information about human rights. We've been teaching people about, you know, the Human Rights Declaration, about the ethical code of conduct of police, for example. We've been talking about health and just sharing all the censored information, bringing it to light, the truth about the numbers, the data, the news, you know, how it's funded by the pharmaceutical industry and so on and so forth, sharing about the risks of the vaccines. So we've been doing that. And then also, I recently began to collaborate with this Spanish organization, Policias Por La Libertad, which is an association created by security personnel here in Spain, who could see that where this is going is creating more conflict. And basically, they felt the need to take action to protect the citizens. They felt that they are having to be like pawns of tyranny, basically, imposing immoral and unconstitutional laws, having to give illegal fines, restrict their movement when that's guaranteed in the Constitution, this kind of things. So they started this association and started organizing marches here in Spain, so we've attended them. And then just last weekend, we went to Barcelona and we launched the international movement, Police for Freedom. And their website is up, actually, it's policeforfreedom.org. And so our aim is to just invite all the uniformed sisters and brothers, because we're all human, right? We all are equal in our rights. So to invite all of them to stand for human rights, stand for freedom. So I'm now connecting with police, military, security guards all across the world. And we are talking about different ways that we can begin to educate the people and educate the uniformed people, because it's just systematic violation of human rights. And no matter what is going on in the world, it's unacceptable. These rights are above the law, as we know from the Nuremberg trials. So even if the legislation changes, human rights cannot change. They're eternal and immutable. So the idea of this movement is to educate, inform people about human rights, natural law, and just to help create unity between the security forces and the people. So I'm working with that. And then recently also became a member of the World Freedom Alliance, where we are coordinating activists. We're informing each other about what's happening in different countries in the world. And I'm also beginning to liaise with them about their connections with different, members of the police around the world. So I'm just seeing this mycelium, this network of organizations just beginning to unite and connect. So actually, it's a very exciting time in a way. Like the light is beginning to organize, finally.
So it's not just the human being against the authorities or the system, because what you're saying is that there are human beings in the system as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, there's human beings in every line of work. There's many police officers who want to do the work in order to...
Uniform.
Exactly, in order to serve and protect the human rights, to keep peace and to guarantee social justice. And they are also being oppressed. Here now in Spain, there is a push that the next people to get the mass vaccination is the security forces. And people's lives and their jobs are being threatened if they don't take it. So they're at risk of losing their work, or they're even at risk of losing their work if they oppose, like for example for the police, if they oppose the orders that they're receiving, although they're going against the Constitution. So we need just a lot more knowledge about why constitutions were created to begin with. What are human rights? Can they be removed? People don't know about this because we never needed to. The only people who know about these are the people that are oppressed. Go talk to a Palestinian about rights and they will tell you everything. But a normal, person walking around in Stockholm or Copenhagen, they will have never needed to ponder what are human rights until they're at threat of being removed from them. Yeah.
So what gives you most hope in the future?
Most hope for me is to see the resilience of the activists and the people that are doing this great work right now of informing the people about what's actually going on. They're being defamed, they're being slandered, they're being attacked. Some people have lost their jobs, but they don't stop. And that just, it makes me feel like I'm looking at the best of humanity when I'm in touch with this kind of people. Like they're so driven to guard what it is to be human. They recognize, that this is our responsibility is to guarantee a free world for the next generations. And so they're not stopping. A lot of them are parents, some of them are working full-time hours, and on top of that, they do all the work to get the information to the people. So I'm just in awe of how resilient and how courageous, how noble some of the people are who are doing this work. And it just fills me with faith, yeah.
Is there anything that you feel that you would like to inform or communicate in this at the end here?
Well, I would like to highlight the meaning of human rights, that they are not granted by the government. They are not the same as laws. They're above the laws. Laws have been created to protect the human rights. So it's the wrong way around if people think that government can remove your rights, because nobody has that authority.
And where do our rights come from?
They come from life itself. So we are born with our human rights. All beings are born with equal rights to freedom and bodily sovereignty, the right not to be violated. So this is based on natural law. This is something actually I would invite everyone to look into. What is natural law? Because this is part of that spiritual knowledge of life. When you come to really comprehend natural law, it's very easy to see what is true, what isn't true, what is good, what is right, what is wrong.
Is natural law the same as common law, or is that something else?
No, natural law is the spiritual law, So natural law is, imagine the visible laws that are in place in our physical reality, like, for example, magnetism or the speed of light or gravity, things like these phenomena that we can verify are real and they're governed by a certain force. Well, we also have laws that are governing our consciousness and the realm of our morality. And they are called, for example, they're called law of cause and effect or law of correspondence. These are spiritual laws that are in place. So it means, for example, one of the most known natural laws is based on the principle of the golden rule. So the golden rule is based on natural law. So they say, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And the reason why this golden rule exists is because actually whatever we do unto others is done to us. So there is no way for us to escape this corresponding law. So if we, for instance, as a humankind, keep violating the rights of a certain ethnic group for decades and decades, then we can't escape from the effect of that causality, meaning at some point we too and our rights also will be violated. This is the way natural law works. So basically what we are witnessing now is just the pendulum swinging back. Everything that we've been doing, all the destruction that we've been doing to other countries, to our fellow animals here, enslaving them and slaughtering them by the billions every year, forcefully vaccinating them, forcefully microchipping them, forcefully isolating them from their families. According to the natural law, the spiritual law, this is what is now coming to us. So just the knowledge of these principalities help us stop that spiritual causation. And if we begin to tune our consciousness into that knowledge, we can begin to create a different world. Because this world is not just a happenstance, coincidence, it's our conscious creation. How we respond to life, how we live our lives, what values we carry.
Would you consider yourself religious?
The word religare, it means to tie back in Latin. So I see religion as a kind of a controlling, hierarchical institution. It feels very stagnant to me. It's based on dogmas. And for me, I'm more, I would just call myself more spiritual. But there's different kinds of ways to be spiritual, I'm a human being. And I feel human beings by their nature are spiritual beings. We inhabit creator consciousness. So I don't align myself to any particular religion. But if I had to say one spiritual tradition and one sacred lineage that I resonate with the most, it would be the Essenes.
And what is that, the Essenes?
The Essenes were a society, a community that lived in the ancient Egypt, and then from there they moved to Israel, and they were known as the healers. They were called the therapeutai, and they lived on the land in communities. They had no slaves, no masters. We're talking thousands of years back. Everything they created was shared, so they had no private ownership. Everything was communal, and they had total reverence for life. So they didn't eat animals, they didn't exploit anything, and they worked to heal people in other communities.
I've just got a thought here. One of the points in the book called The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab, the founder of World Health Organization, Economic Forum, is that we're not going to own anything, any of us. So basically the right to own anything is being taken away, and it's going to be all communal. Is that that was what you were just talking about? Do you think that's an ideal?
Well, no, actually, the difference between that is that in the fourth industrial revolution, Great Reset ideology, things are owned by entities and corporations, but we don't get access to them. We have to rent them. Whereas in the Essene community, everyone owned everything together. So that would mean that nobody owned, there was no money. So imagine we all share land together, we all work together, and we eat from that land. So it's shared ownership. That's a better way to say it. Shared ownership rather than what they're proposing is this rental idea. So you have to still have money in order to live, whereas these guys were completely self-sovereign. And they were the only people in the time of the Roman Empire who didn't have to sign their names into any papers because they were sovereign, and their word alone was considered as a contract. So they were very, very unique peoples. And there are many scriptures that they've written, the Nag Hammadi, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Essene Gospel of Peace. So I see them as a kind of an ideal for what's possible for a sovereign, peaceful, self-realized human being.
Do you think there is a great reset, or there is an attempt to create it, and then there is a greater reset?
Yes, there's definitely an attempt to shift the global society. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I definitely see that there is an attempt to create a permanent shift in the global society. And they are already raising this infrastructure for it with the artificial intellect, with the smart cities. And I see that this whole pandemic response culture is a part of that continuum, because the way I see it is that they're trying to create kind of disease-free zones. I'm already seeing that in certain like dental clinics here in Spain. They have like a stamp on their door saying COVID-19 free zone. So it would make sense to me that this is kind of what they will try to do. They will create these smart cities. And in order for you to get to live there, you have to meet certain like hygiene regulations or certain sanitary standards for that to be declared like a disease-free zone, you know, and it'll be like high-tech surveillance society. And they're talking about the digital identification for everyone, for the entire population of the world, and that will be, you know, embedded technology. So that's definitely in the making, and it's being pushed in a very rapid pace, and it's being sold under the guise of this COVID. You know, like you will need the vaccine passport in order for you to be able to travel safely and not to spread this disease around, and then. Oh, you need to make it more permanent, so why don't we include the vaccine passport into your identification and then have that as a chip? You know, they're already talking about all these scenarios. So I see that is in the making, and it doesn't need a theory. You just need to read, you know, the Great Reset, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, Agenda 2030, Agenda 21, and other documents to see that this plan is in place. But the Greater Reset, which is us humans gaining back our power, I do believe in that. I do have very strong faith that it is happening, because it doesn't actually require a majority of the people to change. It just requires a small percentage of the population to just put all of their energy into it and to create these alternative organizations, like, for example, what we're doing with the Police for Freedom. There's, you know, Doctors for the Truth. There's all these incredible organizations starting to form, and there's even a lot of new political parties that are starting to blossom in all over the world. People are realizing maybe the only way we can get our message into the public dialogue is by creating a political party. Maybe this is the way that we will be heard, because, as you know, the censorship is absolutely rampant. And so a lot of the dissenting voices are just being completely silenced. But we are so creative and so resilient by our nature that we will find a way to get the truth on the table. And so maybe there will be a couple of years of struggling to have it actually manifest. But I'm seeing just a lot of really amazing movements and efforts from people from all around the world.
And how many people do you think in the world really supports the greater resets today? The greater reset, what you just explained. And how many people do you think are needed to really make a difference? Is it 1%, 5%, 10%, or half? Or
I keep hearing,
we are today?
Yeah, I keep hearing the 3.5% as a number that people are talking about, like 3.5%. Yeah, it's a specific number to create a shift in the direction of where we're heading. They also say that once you start getting police and military on board, I forget the book that it's written in, but it's a study of peaceful resistance and Gandhi's method and so on. When you get police and military on board, there's a 60% higher opportunity, again, to dismantle a tyrannical government. So we have all these ingredients already. It is already happening. How many people know what's actually going on? I would say, honestly, people that are lesser educated are more able to see the truth. From my own experience of being in Peru and talking to the villagers, because they don't watch the television as much. So they don't get as much the programming in. One of my activist friends in India, he says the same thing. Most people who are able to see the truth are like the poor people, the common people who work the land or drive a cab, because they are actually talking with each other and they're getting the real information. Whereas I feel like a lot of people who are highly educated and indoctrinated to believe in authority and to believe in this scientism, they are easier manipulated into this agenda.
Do you think less educated means more educated today?
More connected to reality, to what's actually going on. Because the education, unfortunately, in many ways is indoctrination into a citizen of this new world. So we're not taught to question things. We're not taught to tune into our higher self or our intuition, our heart wisdom. We're not really taught to discover the truth, but we're taught to absorb information from certain authorities and adopt it as our reality.
Do you think there is a part of the so-called intellectual elite that is actually, let's say, seeking the truth? Or is there academically educated people that are really open-minded in your opinion?
There are. I know some myself. I spoke to a lady, a PhD from London, who said she's the only one in her colleagues of all the professors she knows who's able to see what's going on, and they are attacking her for going against the grain. But this is how we get whistleblowers. There are people in all areas and even in the academia who know the truth, but for them, they have a lot to lose in terms of their reputation. If they're representing a certain, institution or a certain industry like big pharma or whatever, it really is. They have high stakes when it comes to going against the main popular narrative. So I believe there's a lot of people who are just silent right now because they're terrified to speak up, because you can become a target. We witnessed the smear campaigns against, for example, people like Michael Yeadon, who was he was the, what was it?
Vice President of Pfizer, I think.
Yeah,
ex-Vice President of Pfizer.
Ex-Vice President of Pfizer, that's right, who came to warn everyone about the dangers of this vaccine. So people have a lot that they can lose in terms of their reputation when you are in such a high position that it can feel like your hands are tied. So there's a lot of people who are not speaking up, but they are seeing what's going on. But then there comes a point where you realize that the stakes are too high for me not to speak up. And you see what is at risk. Are we really going to go along with this agenda to totally transform our societies into these medical, pharmaceutical, technocratic dictatorships, basically. You know, microchipped people living in these smart grids, totally separated from nature, and where intimacy is a sin. It's such a dystopian scenario that I believe the more and more people come to see that potentiality, where this juggernaut is heading, the more people are going to start speaking up. I feel like we're just now in the beginning of the great wave.
But then it's a point that more people will speak up because of this. But what about censorship? Because even though more people speak up, but if they're censored, then...
Well, this is where, for example, the political parties come into play, and people creating their own alternative media, you know, their own platforms, their new social media platforms. I mean, it's been amazing to see how many have popped up in the last year. You know, the LBRY, the MeWe, the Minds, Float, Gab, Parler, Odyssey. I mean, all these different people are finding ways to spread the message outside of these big, you know, platforms, these commercial platforms.
But as I remember, Apple censored Parler, right?
Right, yes, yeah. So they are under attack as well. But this is also why we need to gather in person. We need to, imagine if all of us took it upon ourselves to speak to our immediate circle of people, friends and family. If all of us who know what's going on did that, the knowledge would spread in a much more profound way than if we are just sharing stuff online. I think we have to take that responsibility on ourselves to begin to speak up more to the people that we know, even at the risk of being ridiculed, because the truth is on our side.
The last point here is just that one thing you mentioned, which is really interesting, is that you mentioned that we human beings, to a certain degree, have lost our spirit, and at the same, and you say you're spiritual. This is your basically your standpoint in life. What would you say to these people how can we lose our spirit and how can you keep it? Is it only some people who lost the spirit and some people kept it, or how could that happen, do you think?
Yeah, it's in our culture, you know, the way that we've come to live our lives. I see the value system is very different, you know, for us here in the West. And then if you look at the indigenous people, they're very family oriented, whereas we've become very individual oriented. They are a lot about celebrating life, honoring different cycles of growth in an individual's life. You know, they have these different rites of passage that you celebrate to recognize when a girl becomes a woman, when a boy becomes a man. There's different ways that they honor and they revere the human life. Whereas in the modern culture, these things have kind of been taken away, you know, like we don't really learn how to be human. We become these performing robotic citizens of these states that give their lives very much to the system. And then we have a 2-week holiday away in some beautiful island and we feel so alive, you know, we're in the nature, we're swimming, we're just free to express ourselves, and then we go back into the kind of rat race. So I think it's just the way our society has been built into it's like it sucks the life out of everybody. We value things in a completely upside down way. You know, we value productivity and efficiency and money more than our time together with our own children, or being in nature, or discovering your gifts. You know, that's one of the saddest things for me, is seeing how many people have gifts within themselves that they never got to express because their life has become too demanding that they don't have time to do that. You know, brilliant writers or artists, or I don't know, like dancers who never get to do the things that actually spark them to life because their life have become just a rat race in the system. So I just see it as a cultural hijacking, you know, like our culture has been hijacked. It wasn't long ago where it wasn't like this. Just within the last 100 years where it's become so, you know, technologically oriented and money oriented world where we live in. And you know, it's so interesting. People they call these Peruvian jungle people, they call them poor, but they're the richest people I've ever met. I mean, they're just so happy and they own nothing. And again, I don't mean like you're a slave to a system, but they own everything because they live in nature. And they have the birds and their hammock and the trees around them, and they've come to value just life, you know, without anything added to it. They don't need any gear, they don't need any tech, because life is just a gift for them, you know. So it's just that void of giving our lives away into something that doesn't nourish our soul is where I see that this has happened, that the spirit has been distilled, you know, from us as a humankind and as a individual. So as a solution, I would say go to nature as much as you can, rediscover your gifts, express them, you know, see your loved ones as much as you can, and you're back on your way home to who you truly are.
Thank you for sharing your experiences and your point of view on life with us.
Thank you, Martin. It's been really wonderful to talk with you.
Thank you.